Today I'm going to share my chocolate cake recipe. It's super chocolatey, it has a moist crumb, but it's still light at the same time. So to begin, I'm going to trace my pans on some parchment paper. I'm going to cut it out and then spray the sides of my 9-inch pans, and then I'm going to put the parchment paper down. This just helps to release the cake so easily. If you haven't tried parchment paper, I recommend trying it. In a separate bowl, I'm going to whisk together all my dry ingredients. So I'm using all-purpose flour, granulated sugar. I'm also going to be using some dark brown sugar to give it a really nice flavor. And then I'm going to add in the rest of my ingredients: baking soda, baking powder, salt, and espresso powder. Now, I have seen both espresso powder and the instant espresso, and from what I can tell on the internet, it is really marketing. So whether you have the powder or the instant, one might be more coarse than the other, but ultimately it's going to dissolve in the boiling water that we add to the recipe. We can't forget to add our cocoa powder, and then we're going to just whisk this all together until it's nice and incorporated. And then I'm going to set it aside. And it's okay if you make a mess. I make a mess. And then in a separate large bowl, we're going to add our butter. So typically I use a stand mixer, but sometimes it's nice to change it up. So I am using a handheld mixer with a whisk attachment. And it's really nice because this recipe is super easy to put together. So it's a little bit easier to use the handheld. Next, we're going to add in our room temperature butter, and you just want to make sure that that is nice and mixed. And then we're going to go ahead and add in our eggs, our vanilla extract, our buttermilk, and our oil. If you don't have buttermilk on hand, you can make it really easily, and I do have a recipe for that. And then I also added oil to this recipe. So typically chocolate cakes are made with all oil, but I am using butter in my recipe because I prefer the taste of all butter cakes to all oil cakes. So I found a good ratio for both. And then we're going to add in our dry ingredients in 2 batches, and you just want to keep mixing it until it's nice and incorporated. To make this cake come together, we're going to add in our boiling water. You want to be really careful, so make sure that you keep the whisk just facing down because it is super hot and it can splash. And then the batter is going to be pretty thin, and that is exactly what we want. It might even be a little bit lumpy, but that's okay too. And then we're going to evenly distribute this into our prepared baking pans. We're going to bake these cakes at 350 degrees for about 30 to 35 minutes. You want to check it with a toothpick, and as soon as that toothpick starts to come out clean, then you know that your cakes are done. Once your cakes are cooled, you want to let them sit on top of the oven for about 5 or so minutes, and then I like to transfer them to a wire cooling rack. While they're still warm, I like to use a dull knife, so a butter knife or just something that's not too sharp. You don't want to scratch your pans, and just go around the edge of the cake, and this is going to help to release the cake. The pan itself can still be really hot, so make sure to use some oven mitts. And then it seems kind of dramatic, but I actually tried my best to carefully turn out the cake. And then I'm going to peel off the parchment paper, and I'm going to do the same thing for the other cake. And I like to just flip the cakes back over personally. I don't really like when the wire rack kind of imprints on the top of the cake, but if you carve off some of that to make your layers even, it doesn't really matter. I have a chocolate frosting recipe that I will also link down below, and I think that these two just pair really well together. The chocolate frosting just really enhances the flavor of the cake. So if you have a turntable, I would recommend to use that. If you don't, and I know not everyone does, you can frost your cake directly on a plate or even a stand like this. So you want to make sure that your cakes are completely cool, otherwise the buttercream is just going to be a mess. So you want to put down your first layer, add some frosting, your second layer, add some more frosting. Try to kind of keep it even so that the cakes are going to be nice and level. And I'm using an offset spatula, but you could also use a knife, although an offset spatula is so nice. And if you do want to do cake decorating, I would suggest investing in it. It's really not expensive. Then I'm going to add some more buttercream to the sides, and this is a very simple, beginner-friendly way to ice a cake. This isn't really what I would recommend to ice up a very nice cake, or if you're making cakes for customers. This is just kind of like, let's get it done so we can serve it type of thing. To make this simple swirl pattern, I'm going to turn the stand with one hand and then make that swirl by gently pressing the offset spatula into the icing. You don't want to push down too hard. Using a turntable would be much easier, but of course, if you don't have one, it's still possible to get the job done. It just might take a little more time. And also, the larger the spatula, the larger that swirl. And I think larger might look a little better. Now, sometimes, you get messy and that's okay. I'm just using a paper towel to clean off around the cake so that it looks nice and pretty and it's ready for serving. This cake can be stored at room temperature for 2 days and make sure that it's nice and covered, either in a cake dome or with saran wrap. Thanks guys for watching. I'll see you next time.